Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, did you know there's a skill many men never learn that ends up seriously limiting your professional success and satisfaction in your love and sex life? I put together a free guide to explain this unknown skill and give you exactly what you need to use it today. Get it by heading over to ShanaJamesCoaching.com or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144. That's 44144. You'll also get access to Man Alive outtakes, raw footage, and bonus videos you can only get there. Welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm Shana James. I am here with you today by myself because it's a pretty intense time out there in the world for men. And I decided that I wanted to record a personal episode, a personal message to support you in what's happening or to explore what's happening, to really look at how you can stand strong in your power and your goodness as these male role models and superstars are falling, right? So in this episode, I talk some about what men say to me in our coaching sessions, in my workshop facilitation, that men haven't said to another soul. And I actually hope this gives you some freedom to be able to speak some of these deeper places or some of these things that you've held shame around, that you start to know that you can actually take them somewhere, you can share them, that you don't have to hold them alone. I also talked about the rise of the pickup artists and other forms of manipulation. I talk about the cultural shifts we need to prevent future tragedies and step into respect and collaboration between men and women. And I also had very timely an experience with my son at his school recently, where there was a parent who was, really, I would say, unknowingly attempting to shape my son into a man who would eventually suffer, who would eventually experience life through this lens of, I can't share my emotions, I can't tell anyone what's going on, I have to keep this all to myself, which may be something you've experienced. So I hope you, I don't know if enjoy is the right word. I hope you get something from this episode. I hope that it serves you. And please let me know on the Facebook page or send me a message. I am a woman, clearly, who is an ally for men, who supports men. And I feel already choked up as I think about having this conversation, that what's being illuminated right now in the media, that's not new, the rapes, the harassments, and a bunch of our superstars falling. Charlie Rose, Matt Lauer, Harvey Weinstein, Louis C.K., Roy Moore. I mean, the list goes on and on. Every day there's a new, I don't want to just say allegation, because, a lot of these are truth, that men are harassing and abusing women and using their power in pretty horrifying ways. And as an ally for men, it feels important to me that we're not going down the path of shaming and blaming and attacking men, but actually getting curious, actually looking at what are the root causes of these behaviors. So it feels scary for me to be doing this because I 100% support my sisters and have my own experiences of abuse or harassment. But I'm trying to look at this from a perspective of what is missing, what's been missing. And when I've really thought about, I'm raising a boy who's 6 years old, and what do I teach him? How do I help educate him? Not only how do I help educate him about how to treat other people, because that, in a way, it feels like it goes without saying that I know how to do that. What feels scary to me is the messages he's getting and those who are men these days have gotten around that it's weak to show your emotions, that it's weak to cry, that you're supposed to have it all together, that you can't admit when you feel like you're failing, you can't admit when you're struggling. I mean, men, especially men in power, but I think all men, I hate saying all men, but I think it's a very common experience for men to feel like, who am I going to talk to? Who am I going to tell about this? So I've been coaching men for the past 15 or so years, have worked with hundreds of men in person, spoken to thousands of men. And my experience over the years has been profound, that every man I've met has a vulnerable and, beautiful inside, right? Has, sure, I've come into contact with only a certain segment of the population. I haven't been working in prisons, or I haven't been working in, mental institutions. But the men I've met, even when I would have questioned their motivations, have all showed a vulnerability. And I actually remember one of the days when I was working with the Authentic Man program, which was a course for men where we as women got to give men honest and loving feedback. And it was created by Brian Bayer and Travis Decker at the time. And Brian had the vision of this because he was receiving honest and loving feedback from those of us who were his friends at the time. And there was a day when they said, all right, there are a bunch of men coming to this workshop from the pickup community. And if you don't know what the pickup community is, it's a community of men, and there are teachers, and it's still happening all over the world, but I think there has been an upgrade in consciousness. But back 10 or 15 years ago, it was very much men teaching other men how to manipulate women, and how to get their phone numbers, and how to get them in bed, and how to start relationships. But it was so empty. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I can't do this. I can't do this with these men. I can't be honest and loving with them. And then once they came and we started out the workshop sitting across from each other, the men in a row and the women in a row, and I looked into their eyes and I heard them start talking about what was important to them and what they wanted. And, some of them had tears in their eyes. And I just realized, oh my God, these are men who have struggled, who have desires for love and affection and touch and connection. And what options do they have to get it? Right? Now, I don't want to create anybody as a victim. However, when I started to really think about it and I've started to do the research, for them, the option was therapy, which I wholeheartedly believe in therapy, but also see that it can be a very long and slow road and isn't always action oriented, right? Or pickup. There were not a lot of other options. I think now, especially in the Bay Area, we have different embodiment options and meditations and, sex positive cuddling, all kinds of things. But in the majority of the country and the world, even still today, I think it's pretty rare for men to be doing workshops like this. So these men and, the hundreds, thousand or so men I've worked with over the years, they've all had their own pain and their own struggles. And they've all, shared with me things that most men, they've all shared with me things that they either have said they've never shared with anyone or very rarely shared. And they felt safe to do so. And, I was thinking about the men who I've worked with even recently, right? I made a list actually of the things that men have said to me this month alone, right? Men have said, and these are specific quotes from each man. Life on the outside is good, but I feel empty inside and I don't think I can go on like this. Or I've taken on a leadership role and I'm struggling because I don't really fit in anymore. I don't fit on the leadership team. It doesn't feel like yet. And I don't fit in with the people who were my peers. Another man said, I've been drinking at night by myself because life feels overwhelming and I'm not really having fun anymore. I don't know how to have fun anymore with the responsibilities of being an adult. Another man said, I have the opportunity to step up at work into this leadership position, but I don't believe in myself. Another man told me that he's been in a relationship with his wife for 20, 30 years and they've never had a conversation about sex. And they're more like roommates or business partners and they haven't talked about it. And he feels hopeless. Another man told me that the way he set up his life or the way life has been, he's been living his life between kids, commute, etc. Like he's, it's killing him. Another man said, I don't trust myself to date without moving too fast and losing myself and getting caught up in the desire. I mean, these are things that a lot of men don't talk about. And I had another man recently, and this brings tears to my eyes, who was in the middle of a divorce, and he told me that his wife called him a monster. And he said that, there were times over the years that he had flirted with other women, but he'd never cheated. And, his ex-wife was livid and she had a right to be pissed. I'm not saying, we should just say, oh, it wasn't a big deal. I mean, there is a range of what people, men and women both, can do to be out of integrity or to break trust. But, anytime someone breaks our trust, it is painful and we have a right to be mad. But then this is the part that I think most people may not consider, right? Then when I started to ask him, well, why did you do it? What was happening in your relationship? And his answer was that for all this time he'd been married and hadn't felt affection or connection, that he'd been trying to reach out and create a kind of softening or intimacy. And he felt really rejected. Now, I'm not saying, that this puts him in the right. I think there are two sides of every dynamic. And we could say, okay, it's this man's right to speak up for himself and say what he needed and wanted. And, he could have left the relationship. He could have done something in integrity, right, with himself. So all of that could be true. But then when you look, it's just always more complicated than that. What about the fact of seeing, oh, he had kids and he didn't want to break up his marriage or impact his kids in a negative way, right? What about remembering that our monogamous culture is set up that there are very few acceptable ways to receive affection or care or touch when you're married or when you are in a long-term relationship, if it's not happening there. And when I think about my own sex education and what's happening, still a lot these days is sex education based on abstinence or sex education based on here are the nuts and bolts, make sure you use protection. I think I remember seeing a condom put on a banana or some very surface explanation of what sex is and how it happens. And I remember every weekend, my 8th grade health teacher would say, have a great weekend and keep your pants on, right? There was no deeper conversation of, wow, what are the beautiful parts of sex? What are the meaningful parts of sex? Why would we choose to do it? What are we wanting here? Are there other ways to create what we want? Because this is a pretty powerful one that can cause some incredible pain and devastation if we do it in a way that doesn't honor ourselves. What are we going for here? And I think there are some modern day sex education programs, but most of us didn't receive that. And when I think about men, especially, who on top of not receiving that, are now in this age of internet porn and are consistently filled with these images of, or it's so easy, to be taking in these images of empty sex. And I really feel for men. I feel for the struggle of this being a thing that you can do it on your own, you can masturbate on your own, but it's not the same as having sex with another person, having this kind of intimacy with another person. And so what are the solutions, right? What do men do when they're having a desire, a need? How do they move forward in a way that's in integrity? I was talking to one man who told me that one of the struggles he faces in his marriage is that when he comes home and he's strong and he's powerful and he's had a great day and his work has gone well, his wife is really attracted to him. And on the other days when he comes home and he feels a little bit disheartened or defeated and needs a little bit of love or attention, that his wife is no longer attracted to him. And, that it's become a problem for them. And he feels this hopelessness. And I think rightly so, there's a sense of like, wait, what about me? What about being cared for? What about having it be okay that I'm not the rock? I don't have it together all the time. And I think about my dating experience after being divorced, and so being in my late 30s and 40s. And the men I've dated have often said to me, I've never been listened to the way you listen to me. I've never felt as safe to be vulnerable as with you. I've never felt as cared for or seen. I've always felt like I have to put up this front. I have to be the strong guy, have it all together. And again, I don't want to paint them as the victim. I think we, as men and women both, have to start educating other people when we are the ones who are willing to be more vulnerable and willing to be more emotional. I think, there's some work to do to let other people know, hey, this is a part of me. And I need you actually to accept this part of me. So I don't want to make men the victim here. But I do think that there is a way culturally that we as women can shame and blame and attack and get disgusted, or I'm going to say allow ourselves not to be attracted to men when we see signs of this kind of weakness or smallness, right? Instead of learning how to actually see a man's greatness and see all of him and realize that when he's showing up with his pain or frustration or struggle, that he's still, the strong and incredible man he was yesterday, and he will be tomorrow, and he still is in the middle of expressing this pain and vulnerability. And so I think there is a place for us as women to be able to hold men in a new way. And it's a tricky one too. I think about what could come back at me from people hearing me say that. I think about what women might say and how women might be pissed. Like, it's not my job to educate men. I need them to actually educate themselves. And there are amazing men out there, and men who are workshop facilitators and therapists and coaches who are educating men. So it is happening. And women don't have to be the only ones to do this. But I do think that there's a way that I have learned, particularly over the past 15 years, to open my heart and actually see deeper than what a man presents on the surface, to see the pain and the struggle and the frustration and the heartache and the parts of him that feel like they're dying inside because they're not expressing those vulnerabilities, because they haven't found a safe place to go with them. And I think about what Brené Brown said in one of her talks. She was saying that a man came up to her after the talk and asked why she doesn't or didn't at that time work with men. And he said, my wife and my daughters say they want me to be vulnerable, but they'd rather see me fall off my horse, my white horse, than actually hear what's going on for me. So I think there is something for us as women to really explore, like, why is it so painful to see a man struggle like that? I mean, in some ways, it's because most of us haven't seen it, right? Most of our fathers and male adult figures, I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen my dad cry. And so we're not used to it. And I also think I was in my son's school the other day. He's in kindergarten. And I was picking him up and he was really scared. And he was crying. Some kid had played this game that really freaked him out. He was very visibly upset. He was crying. And we were walking down the hall to the car, and I was asking him some questions and, about what happened, and just reflecting that he seemed really scared and that made sense. And this woman comes walking down the hall and she says, "No tears, no tears." She looked at him and she says this. And I remember just kind of stopping in my tracks and feeling really confused. Like, wait, she's talking to my kid. Why would she say this? And I looked at him and I looked at her and I said, actually, I'm okay with tears. And I looked at my son and I said, you can cry. If you're scared, if you're sad, whatever, if you need to cry, you cry. And then I thought about how many men have been raised, no tears, don't be a pussy, don't be a girl, like, right? Where that I think there's an ad campaign that came out recently about actually, showing girls and their strength versus this sense that boys were taught that if you cry, you're like a girl. Don't be weak, get back up. There's a place for encouraging boys and girls both to get back up. If something happens, they fall down and they struggle. But we can't set boys up to have nowhere to go and to feel horrible about the emotions and the struggles that are a natural part of life. I believe that now more than ever, men need our compassion. I believe that men need our belief in them and curiosity about what had you do this? Some of them may not be able to say, but others will be able to speak to the heartache and speak to the pain. I believe that we need to be able to hear men's stories. Too many men are isolated and alone and feel disempowered, even though supposedly, right, men have power and privilege. The collective of men have power and privilege, but individual men do not always feel empowered. And we've had mass shootings and again, all of these, rapes and harassments that are being revealed. And clearly, right? Clearly men are suffering. I believe men need a place to cry and fall apart, or, they don't have to cry, but they can, and they can admit their fears and their concerns, their struggles in their business and their financial lives and their love lives with their children. These are all potentially painful experiences that if we expect men to just barrel through and not feel or express or talk about this pain, they start to implode or explode in the ways we've been seeing. And I believe we need to explore more ways for men to bring their desires and the vulnerability of needing care and affection and touch and, wanting to be sensual or sexual and wanting to have that be a part of their lives. I believe that we need to find more ways for it to feel safe for men to do this, because otherwise what we see is this underground, power play, which isn't necessarily just about sex, but a way that clearly men are not feeling like they can get their desires and their needs met. And they have to, they have to find someone who is in a position of less power or someone who's depending on them to get those needs met. I've really been thinking a lot lately about my desire to work in more realms than sex and relationship. And I've already been working with men on leadership and success, but to really make that more prevalent or more in the forefront of the work I do. And yet, there's also this calling in me that feels like until we can actually talk about sex in a mature way, and until it's in the light instead of the shadow in our culture, I can't not talk about it. Because then it leaves men, hanging out there without, so probably a bad metaphor, but right, without the support, without the compassion. So I don't want to let anyone off the hook for making bad choices. I don't think any man is bad, but there are some very serious bad choices that are being made. And I also want to acknowledge that there are men who would never harass or abuse or do these things. But I would venture to guess that men who haven't felt safe to express their power, their truth, their needs, their sexuality, have thought about it, that it's crossed their mind. And can we actually acknowledge that that doesn't make somebody bad, right? To think about it and to be willing to admit those shadows doesn't make someone bad. And so having more space and places for men to admit these things so that then they don't act them out. So I feel clear that it's time to have a deeper conversation. It's time to look beyond the surface level of what's happening and actually address the cause of what's creating these situations, what's creating the dynamics between men and women. And it's not a simple task, but I believe that it's time, and I believe we're ready for it. I believe that we, as women, men, all genders, I believe that we are ready to have a conversation that's not based in blaming and shaming and attacking, and to actually see each other's perspectives, to see each other's sides. And I feel inspired to continue to make that happen. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.